Hello, and welcome to the Osteoarthritis Action Alliance Lunch and Learn webinar for August 17th, 2022. My name is Kirsten Ambrose, and our presenter today is Lauren Hawkinson. Ms. Hawkinson is a third-year doctoral student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She earned a bachelor's degree in athletic training from Winona State University and a master's degree in exercise and sports science with emphasis in athletic training from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Prior to returning to Chapel Hill to pursue a PhD in human movement science, Lauren worked clinically as an athletic trainer at the University of Richmond and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research area of interest is the development of successful implementation strategies for ACL injury prevention programs in a variety of youth sports settings. Outside of grad school, Lauren enjoys college sports, reading, and playing the piano. We are excited for her presentation today, titled Understanding Youth Sport Coaches' Perceptions of Evidence-Based Injury Prevention Exercise Programs. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk with you all about the scoping review that I conducted over the course of the last year. Before I go any farther into the presentation, I do want to thank my co-authors on this project. Even though I'm the one giving the presentation today, I would not be here without the people that you see listed here. They were all instrumental in building this project, and I want to acknowledge their contributions. ACL reconstruction rates continue to rise among adolescents, so that 13 to 17-year-old age group, particularly among 13 to 17-year-old females. In 2002, Herzog et al. Found that females in that age group had comparable rates of reconstruction to males in that 13 to 17-year-old age group, and reconstruction rates that were lower than males in the 18 to 30-year-old age group. However, by 2014, the rise in reconstruction rates among 13 to 17-year-old females had risen so sharply that they now had the highest ACL reconstruction rate than any other sex strata. As 75 to 80% of ACL injuries are non-contact in nature, there are evidence-based injury prevention exercise training programs that are focused on improving neuromuscular control. And these programs improve that neuromuscular control through the incorporation of balance, agility, strength, plyometric, and flexibility exercises. And when those programs are done consistently and correctly, they're capable of reducing the risk of ACL injury by up to 62%, which is great news. However, even though we know that these programs are successful in reducing that rate of injury, only about 20% of youth sports coaches currently implement them with their teams. So it's important to gain an understanding of youth sport coach behavior and motivation to implement these injury prevention programs. So traditionally, we've had a focus on that implementation phase of the implementation process, that's the active implementation. However, I'd like you to think of capital I or big I implementation, and then lowercase or little I implementation. Big I implementation is going to be that full multi-phase process. However, like I said, we've traditionally just looked at it as one phase, which is really just that little I implementation phase, that actual putting the program into practice. And we've done a great job determining which exercises will be most effective and developing and using frameworks for that little I implementation. However, we also need to understand the phase just prior to implementation. This phase prior to implementation has been identified by Allison Metz as the installation phase. And this stage is often overlooked, but it's really crucial to prepare individuals for that active implementation phase. So the purpose of this scoping review was to explore and summarize the current literature that examines youth sport coaches' knowledge, beliefs, contextual perceptions surrounding injury prevention training program implementation. Our ultimate goal is to use these findings to provide some direction for future research, which is aimed at identifying appropriate strategies to increase the implementation of injury prevention training programs. To organize our findings for this scoping review, we utilized the implementation science framework called the Theoretical Domains Framework, or the TDF. So just a brief overview of the TDF here. It is an implementation science framework that's used to identify individual barriers and facilitators to implementation. Overall, there's a total of 14 domains, and those are listed here. Nestled under each of those domains are constructs, some of which I will outline in an upcoming slide. But in the current review, the results of the included studies fell under these 4 domains: knowledge, beliefs about capabilities, beliefs about consequences, and environmental context and resources. While additional domains, which I've highlighted here, so skill, goals, social influences, social and professional role and identity, may also be important in terms of encouraging coaches to implement injury prevention training programs. There was little to no evidence of these domains available within the included studies. So this perhaps indicates that there's a need to evaluate these factors further in our future research. So as I mentioned, the 4 domains under which the results of the included studies fell were knowledge, beliefs about capabilities, beliefs about consequences, and environmental context and resources. Highlighted here are the definitions of the domains that were utilized in this review. And I'll just give you a quick minute to read through these definitions, as these definitions were important when we were trying to categorize our results. All right, so in addition to using the definitions on the previous slide, when we categorize the study results, we also use the constructs that are listed here. So for example, if you look under the knowledge domain, if the results of a study indicated that coaches identified incorrect exercises to include in an ACL injury prevention training program, this fell under the construct of procedural knowledge. In this specific example, it would be a lack of procedural knowledge. And then under the beliefs domain, if coaches thought that the implementation of an injury prevention program would reduce injury, then that would fall under outcome expectations construct. And then finally, looking over to the environmental context and resources domain, if coaches mentioned a lack of support from administration to attend continuing education programs, then this fell under the construct of organizational culture and climate. Here is the process that we used when conducting the literature search and determining which articles would be included. If you're interested, you can scan that QR code down in the bottom right corner to see a reference list of the included studies. I conducted an electronic database search using PubMed and Google Scholar to identify the studies for inclusion. Articles were excluded if they did not include the knee, had no mention of ACL injury prevention programs, and did not evaluate knowledge, attitudes, or beliefs of coaches at the youth sport level. We identified the youth sport level as ages 9 to 18. Overall, 19 studies were included in our final review. Unfortunately, very few of the included studies reported on coach demographics that affect social determinants of health. Only 4 reported coach education level, 2 reported rurality or urbanicity of teams, and only 1 reported the race or ethnicity of the coaches that they surveyed. 100% of the included studies looked at knowledge and beliefs, and 79% evaluated the environmental context and resources domain. Of the injury prevention programs that were used in the studies, 58% were just a general lower extremity injury prevention program. 26% of the studies evaluated specifically the FIFA 11+, and 16% of the studies looked at other specific programs. So for example, one that they looked at was called the Activate program. Another was knee control. Of the 19 studies included, 84% utilized a behavioral theory and or an implementation science framework. The behavioral theories that were used included the health belief model, theory of planned behavior, and the trans-theoretical model. Some examples of the implementation frameworks that were used include the RE-AIM framework. So that looks at reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance of programming. They also used the health action process approach, or the HAPA framework, as well as the precede proceed model. Finally, 84% of the studies that were included in this review focused only on basketball and or soccer coaches. And over half of the research was completed outside of the United States. And that was also then within independent or non-school associated elite sport organizations. So what do the results of this scoping review tell us about youth sport knowledge, youth sport coach knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about injury prevention training programs? The good news is that coaches generally have a very positive attitude towards ACL injury prevention training programs and believe that if they do use them, their athletes will be at a lower risk of injury. However, the self-efficacy among coaches regarding their ability to deliver the program was mixed, if it was even evaluated. There was also a general lack of knowledge among youth sport coaches. So many did not know of the existence of injury prevention training programs. And then if they did know of their existence, they were unlikely to be able to identify the exercises that would be most effective to include in that program. Additionally, they were not comfortable in properly instructing their athletes on completion of those exercises. However, although they lack knowledge, coaches are aware that they lack this knowledge and would like to improve. However, if we take a look at the environment and resources domain, they perceive a lack of availability in educational programming. And if they are aware of availability of this kind of programming, the coaches felt that they didn't have much administrative support to attend those programs. Finally, under that environment and resources domain, we can see the more commonly cited barriers to implementation of ACL injury prevention programs, such as time, space, equipment, financial support. So big picture, these findings demonstrate that information about injury prevention training programs and their effectiveness to prevent ACL injury has not fully reached that youth sport coach level. There's varied degree of knowledge among coaches about those risk factors and consequences of ACL injury, as well as inconsistent knowledge of the interventions available to reduce risk and how to successfully implement these interventions. Although there are programs out there to enhance coach knowledge of ACL injury prevention, the general perception among coaches is that they don't exist. And then if they are aware of these opportunities, they feel a lack of support from administration to attend. So moving forward, it's essential to develop accessible, appropriate, feasible mechanisms to broaden youth sport coaches' knowledge on the impact that participation in an ACL injury prevention training program can have on their student athletes. So if we think back to the theoretical domains framework, in our present study, knowledge, environmental context and resources, and then secondarily that beliefs domain with a focus on self-efficacy appear to be the three domains for which we should identify some corresponding strategies to enhance implementation. The really cool thing about the theoretical domains framework is that the creator of the TDF, Susan Michie, has also created a mechanism to match specific strategies to domains, to those barriers and facilitators that are identified under each domain. And this matching strategy has previously been successful when trying to implement programming within school settings. So for example, there was a nationwide nutrition program in Australia, and it had extremely low uptake. However, following a targeted strategy intervention, so the researchers used the TDF to identify barriers and facilitators, mapped strategies to those barriers and facilitators, implemented those strategies in the school. Following the implementation of those strategies, there was a significant increase in the number of healthy items that were offered in the school cafeteria, decrease in the unhealthy items, and just an overall increase in compliance with the program overall. So if we shift back to our results, if we use this mapping of strategies to the domains, there were approximately 11 strategies that would be effective to target those domains of knowledge, environmental context, and resources and beliefs. I've just listed 3 examples of strategies here. Like I said, there's several more. So we have some options of strategies to implement with coaches. We also know that we'd like our outputs to be an increase in readiness to implement among coaches, which we then hope leads to actual implementation and ultimately the reduction in risk of ACL injury. But I think the question now is, how do we fill that mechanisms piece? What mechanisms do we need to bridge that gap between using those strategies and successfully moving us to those outcomes of coach readiness and implementation? So how do we effectively put those strategies to use among youth sport coaches? Generally, we believe that the place to start is in the development of a train the trainer mechanism. And this would be targeted specifically at coaches in the school organized youth sport setting in the United States. As evidenced in the current review, there's little known about this demographic. A lot of the research has taken place outside of the US in a non-school sport setting. So it's really important that future research evaluates the needs of the coaches in this school setting and develop an understanding of what their motivations are to ensure that the packaging of whatever implementation strategies we settle on is acceptable, appropriate, and feasible for them. Based on the limited research done within this demographic, we anticipate that it will be similar to what we found in this study of targeting knowledge, environmental factors, and self-efficacy. But I would really like to emphasize that the continued use of proactive implementation frameworks and behavioral theories in the development of these train the trainer programming models will be necessary to ensure that we find the right fit. And really important, one of the main tenets of implementation science is the involvement of stakeholders from the very beginning. So really importantly, as we move forward, is to include those coaches from the beginning and include them in the development of the education programs, of the injury prevention programs, and then we need their input to adapt and be flexible in changing the programs, tweaking them to fit their settings as necessary. I've included the QR code on this slide again. So if you're interested in checking out a list of the studies that were included in the scoping review, you can follow that QR code. The full text of the scoping review will be published soon in a special issue of the Journal of Athletic Training that is focusing on the pediatric ACL. So if you'd like to read more about this, to keep an eye out for that. My contact information is there in the bottom left, so please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions after we go through the Q&A today. And I'd just like to thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren. That's very interesting. We have time for a couple of questions. Just a reminder, you can type any questions into the chat box, and also in a few minutes, you will see a poll pop up on your screen with some survey questions. So please answer those before you leave the webinar. One thing as we look ahead, actually there is one question in the chat from Emma. She says, this is so interesting. It seems like a big part of this needs to include buy-in by administration in order to allow coaches to be able to do what needs to be done. Have possible solutions been addressed to look into this?
You are absolutely right. I agree completely. It starts with administration. From the little bit of research that I've done into coach education programming, they are much more likely to attend educational programming if it's being suggested or mandated by their administrators. So I think it's important to include, moving forward, to include those administrators in the development of these programs. So what would entice administrators to send their coaches to these programs? What would they like to see included in the program to enhance the skills of their coaches? So yeah, I think that's a really, really important point. I haven't seen too much current research or past research on the involvement of administrators, but as I mentioned, with implementation science research, including all of those stakeholders is really important to develop successful strategies.
Thank you. Yeah, and then, we spend so much time thinking about coaches, rightfully so, but athletic trainers have a big role as well, certainly when you get into high school and college sports. So how can athletic trainers be involved in increasing participation in injury prevention programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially at the high school level, athletic trainers are spread so thin, and it's impossible for them to be at every sports practice. So I think athletic trainers can play a big role in being that, I guess, number one trainer. They can be the trainer to train the coaches in delivery of these injury prevention programs. And I think that would also help to enhance the coach's motivation to use these programs. If they're being educated and encouraged to use these programs by someone that they already have a trusting relationship with, I think that goes a long way, rather than having someone from outside the organization come in and teach the coaches. So I see the role of the athletic trainers within the organization as super important to facilitate this.
Great. And Lee says, very nice talk. Are there standards that coaches have to meet to be coaches? And could this be mandated in the standards?
It depends. It depends on the state for the certain levels that coaches have to, or like certain standards that coaches have to meet. It was really interesting when doing this scoping review. I believe in 2 or 3 of the studies, when coaches were surveyed, they actually suggested that injury prevention education be a part of their mandated training. So it seems that coaches are open to having that be a mandated piece. So I think that's definitely an avenue that we should explore moving forward. Like how can we affect policy to improve implementation?
I think that's a great place to start. And then as a side note for our attendees, we've appreciated Lauren's participation in developing a mobile app for the Osteoarthritis Action Alliance's Remain in the Game toolkit, which is designed to help coaches, athletic trainers, and even players, team captains, easily develop an injury prevention warm-up that they can do in real time on the field. Shameless plug that beta testing for the app will be available very soon, so check that out. But my question for you, Lauren, how can athletic trainers and coaches use a tool like a mobile app effectively in practice? Do you think this would be helpful? It seems like it really fits or it speaks to a lot of the points you made in that pie wheel slide, where coaches know this is important and but they struggle to identify which exercises or how to instruct athletes and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think having the app at their fingertips on their phone is really helpful. Something that I read when doing the scoping review was that coaches would, if they went to an education program, they'd receive a packet or a binder, but then that would just sit in their office. They wouldn't bring that out to the field with them. So I think the development of an app and use of an app will be really instrumental in kind of bridging that gap between the education and then putting it to use into practice. And then from the athletic trainer's perspective, I would have found the app really helpful, particularly when I was an athletic trainer at the collegiate level. If I could have assigned exercises to my student athletes, gotten them logged into the app, especially when they would go home on break. So then they could track their progress. They could send me questions and that sort of thing while I wasn't there one-on-one to work with them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to use the app and develop it out further. So I'm really excited to see where it goes.
We are too, and this is really encouraging. We built in some functionality, like you've described, being able to assign workouts to your players, but you've given us some good thoughts for how we can make that even a little bit more interactive going forward. So we'll keep that in mind. We have just a couple more minutes. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but we'll give people a chance to ask them. In the meantime, I'll quickly just put in a plug for next month's webinar on September 21st, that we will have Ashley Buck, who will present on Mind the Gap, exploring nutritional health and weight management interests of individuals with osteoarthritis. So tune in for that. And you probably saw the poll just launched on your screen. Take a moment to answer those questions if you would. And without seeing any additional questions, I just want to thank everyone for your attendance today and the good questions that came through. I think that always helps us have a good discussion and generate some new ideas. And especially want to thank our presenter, Lauren Hawkinson. Very much appreciate your time and the work that you're doing in this area.
Thank you so much. It was great to present.
Excellent. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Everybody have a great day.